Welcome back to part two of the real reason ambitious working moms feel constantly behind and why the advice of time management, balance, and or doing less are all wrong advices for you. So, this is part two of the same episode. I won't go deep into what we covered in that episode. So go catch up on that. That's episode number 74. This is episode number 75. And in this episode, you're going to find out why you're not burned out because you're doing too much, but you're burned out because of this. But first, I also need to share with you all my own insight from when I recorded this episode on Friday. That is episode number 74. And one thing I realized was for me, podcast recording is a place where I find myself like running up to the last minute to say that, okay, I need to record a podcast episode. I want to, not that I'm forcing myself to. I love sharing these insights and these groundbreaking aha value added takeaways for all of you. But also, I find myself constantly not being able to keep up with my own desire to create more and more podcast episodes. So it got me thinking, why is this happening? Because I'm somebody, once I commit to something, I get it done all the way. But we all have that one thing in our lives where it's like this one thing, as important as it is to me, somehow is a thing that gets on the back burner. We all have that, right? So I got to thinking about that. And this morning I had the realization that's because when I want to record my podcast episodes, that usually happens later during the day. By then, my mind is already occupied with a bunch of other things that I've done during the day in terms of my work. So by the time I get around to thinking of recording a podcast episode, I don't feel as inspired. I don't feel as excited. I feel like I won't have enough time to complete recording that episode before I have to jump on to the next thing. So this morning, I realized, you know what? This is not going to be the thing I do during the middle of the day anymore. This is going to be the first thing that I do as soon as I get to work. So I typically get in front of my computer after my kids leave to school. By then, I'm almost ready. If not, I will take another 5-10 minutes to get ready. And then I am at my computer anywhere between 8 to 8:15 a.m. And I start conversing with other people or interacting with other people in terms of work or have client calls and all of that 9 a.m. onwards. But usually what I do is I take that time between 8 to 9 to set things up for myself, to do the things that I need to be doing without being interrupted by anybody else. But I was like, you know what? Podcast is actually the thing that I should be doing first thing in the morning. So today it's a Monday morning. Right now, as I look at the time, it's 8:20 a.m. And this, in fact, is the perfect time for me to record a podcast episode. So going forward, that's exactly what I'm going to be doing. And also, this happens as a result of you setting up yourself for success even before Monday morning happens. Let me ask you this question. For how many of you, Monday morning is that frantic, crazy rush madness? And the last thing that you will likely think of if you were me is recording a podcast because your mind is running at 100 miles per hour in 100 different directions. But the way I operate, I already set myself up for success for the rest of the week, even before Monday happens. That's why I look forward to Monday mornings. But trust me when I say there used to be a time in my life years ago when I would dread Monday mornings. I hated Monday mornings. Monday mornings, I had the least amount of excitement. I had to push myself to find that drive and that motivation and that inspiration. Fast forward to now, I love my Monday mornings because it helps me hit the ground running and do the things that I need to do. So perhaps Monday mornings are going to be my sacred time to record podcast episodes. So, if you are like me, struggling with one of those aspects in your life where you're like, this is really important to me, and this is so important to me that I want to give this so much time, energy, effort, and exactly why that is the thing that is taking the most amount of hit and not really getting the attention that it needs to from you, then implement something like this in your own life as well and see how much of a difference it can start making for you. Because right now, I am super stoked to record this episode and get this in front of you. On the other hand, had I waited until this afternoon to do this, I would feel that dip in the excitement and my drive and motivation to do this, because by then I'd be thinking about the other things that are more important at that point of time for me to do. Okay. And it's honestly blowing my mind, because why did I not think of this before? And why did it actually take me so long to get to this resolution? Because now that I say it out loud, it is just so obvious. But why was it not so obvious? I also have a connection there for that, because when I recorded episode number 74, I actually stated the problem, quote unquote problem, because when I stated that problem, because this is classic example of how our subconscious works, how we actually function. When you ask a quality question, when you state a problem from a perspective that you're setting the intention to find a resolution, find an answer, your subconscious will do everything in its power to make sure that you find the answer, that you find the resolution. So a lot of people don't even want to acknowledge the problems that they're facing in life, because they've just so normalized this way of being in life. They're not even looking for a resolution. So if you don't address, because again, I mentioned this in episode 74, unless you acknowledge something to be a problem, your mind is not going to look for a resolution for that, which actually sets us up really well for this episode. I did not plan that, but as I just said that, it sets us up really well for this episode. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Welcome to the Inner Golden Hour podcast, where dreams take flight, mind, body, and soul get a serious holistic upgrade, and personal evolution transforms into a shared spiritual adventure. Consider this your dedicated sanctuary for exploration, self-discovery, unfiltered truths, diverse perspectives, and some much-needed heart-to-heart real talk. Hi, I'm your host Kusum. I'm a mindset and manifestation life and business coach. Think of me as that best friend you never knew you needed. The one unafraid to call out your BS, deliver a dose of tough love, and hit you with some truth bombs. This podcast is more than just a series of episodes. It's a transformative experience, guiding you to dig into your truths, ditch those old beliefs, and fully embrace the real, authentic you. It's an invitation to align your mind, body, heart, and soul, to dream big, to explore what truly lights you up, and to manifest a reality that surpasses your wildest imagination. Envision this space as the magical golden hour when everything radiates with a breathtaking glow, revealing the depths of your inner world. Now, come along and immerse yourself in a perpetual flow of inspiration, insights, and massive transformation across all areas of your life. Let's explore the extraordinary, one enlightening episode at a time. We left off talking about this feeling of feeling behind, because this is the thread that runs through everything. And when that happens, when you feel behind, what most ambitious working moms say is that I just need more time, or I just need to manage my time better, or once the season passes, things will calm down. But what you all are actually describing isn't a scheduling issue. Because in this episode, we are going to talk about the advice you've probably been given, because this is where most ambitious working moms start blaming themselves. Because we've all been told to manage our time better. And with that same example that I just gave you, I am the master of managing my time. And yet, I couldn't find the time, or rather the space, in my day, in my week, where I actually dedicated the time that I wanted to my podcast, right? And again, there's more to that than just not being able to offer the time or space, which we won't get into just yet. But then you get the picture. You start getting to understand this better, right? Because we are told that you've got to simplify things. We are told to do less. You are told to find that damn balance, that elusive damn balance, which is the biggest lie and the biggest trap. I have a few episodes that I've already dedicated to this topic of balance being the biggest myth. So you can go catch up on those episodes as well. Now, on the surface level, all of that sounds reasonable. All of that sounds amazing, right? Like, why wouldn't I want to manage my time better? Why wouldn't I want to simplify things? Wouldn't I want to do less? Why wouldn't I want to find balance, right? So, on the surface, all of that sounds reasonable. But this is what most people are missing is if this advice actually worked for women like you and me, why are so many capable, smart, intelligent, high functioning moms still exhausted day in and day out? Why are the women who are the best at implementing systems often the most burned out? And this answer is the most uncomfortable, but it's also the most important because time management assumes the problem is external. It assumes that the issue is how your hours are allocated, how your tasks are organized, how efficiently you move through the day. But your exhaustion isn't coming from inefficient use of time. It's coming from the fact that your mind and body never actually power down because you don't rest when the work is done. You rest when the pressure lifts. I will repeat that one more time because our body is not conditioned to rest when the work is done. Because how many times do you feel like I have done everything that I wanted to, but yet you are still not able to just sit on the couch and relax and truly rest even for half an hour? Because the pressure that you put on yourself, the pressure that you've taken on, it's still there. So unless that pressure lifts, your body, your mind, your soul, even though your soul is begging for rest, your body and mind are not going to take in that rest and actually relax. Because for most ambitious working moms, the pressure never really lifts. There's always something. So when someone tells you to manage your time better, what they're really saying is organize your life so well that you don't feel what you're feeling. And that's the masculine way of doing things. That's what we've been told. That's what I was also for the longest time in my life trying to get towards. That was my goal. Because when you're trying to organize your life without feeling the feelings, what you're doing is compartmentalizing without actually addressing the problem underneath it. So the pressure is always there because that's the biggest problem that you're not addressing. Now, is that relief? No, that's not relief at all. That, in fact, if anything, is avoidance. Now, if that's avoidance, next, let's talk about doing less. Because this actually gets tricky because there is a time and place for doing less to actually be the advice that you need and implement. But more often than not, just the surface level doing less doesn't really cut it. And this is exactly why. Because while on paper, doing less might sound like freedom, right? Like for all of us, if you can really get on board with the fact that, oh, if I just have to do less, that sounds like such liberation and freedom. But here's the tricky part. For women like you and I who are driven, doing less without changing the internal rules just means you feel guilty while doing it because you sit on the couch, but your mind is still running. You take time off, but you're mentally making these long lists. You say no to something, but you replay it afterward, wondering if you should have handled it differently, if you should have just sucked it up and said yes anyway. So you're technically doing less, but you're not actually carrying less inside. And that's exactly why it doesn't work. Because guess what? You don't need permission to stop doing things, but you need permission to stop holding everything together alone all by yourself. And that brings us to the next point. Speaking of balance, because this is the one that is quietly causing the most amount of harm in society in general. Because balance, like I said, balance sounds healthy, it sounds neutral, but what it actually implies underneath that surface level advice is that balance means measurement, right? It implies that if you just get the ratios right, like that balance scale, everything will start to feel okay. And when that doesn't happen, because how many times have you actually felt like, okay, I've been able to give enough attention to this aspect and this aspect and this aspect, everything should actually feel fine. But when that doesn't happen, you assume that this math is actually off, and what do? You start trying harder. And balance, if anything, turns into this constant self audit. Am I giving enough to work? Am I doing enough for my kids? Am I doing enough for myself? Am I doing enough for my partner? Yada, 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 yada. And the moment something feels off, you start spiraling, and then you start asking yourself, oh, what do I need to fix? And this is what people are not actually understanding, and that's why this is not the one that's spoken about the most, because perhaps they themselves don't understand this, because a lot of these advice that you get are managing symptoms. Exactly why balance also keeps you focused on managing symptoms instead of addressing the source, the problem at the root of it, because the source isn't that you're doing too much. The source is actually that you're living under a constant internal expectation to be on in every single row all the time. And that expectation is not going to just go away or disappear just because you reorganize your schedule or color coded your calendar. And that's exactly why you can have a day that looks perfectly balanced on paper and still feel completely depleted by the end of it. Exactly why, even when the external picture looks perfectly fine, the internal experience feels exactly the opposite. And exactly why I say so many of these gurus doling out advice, it stops at that external, it stops at the masculine doing, but not the feminine being. And that, in fact, is the biggest gap, because these people are just looking at the symptoms on the outside, but nobody is actually asking, hey, who is this person that's getting this advice? What is actually happening for them internally? Can we take a look at that? Can we actually dig deeper and get to the root of it before we start doling out generic advice to every single person? Because guess what? One size doesn't fit all, and that is applicable across the field. It's universal, because you are made differently and I'm made differently. What keeps me up at night will be different from what keeps you up at night. Yes, we have a lot in common, but at the end of the day, even if it's the exact same reason that keeps both you and me up at night, the reason underneath the reason underneath the reason underneath that reason of why that is even a problem on the surface level is completely different for you than it is for me. And that is something that people fail to understand. This is exactly why I say that there is nothing wrong with your ambition. You don't need to tone it down. You don't need to want less. You don't need to become a different kind of woman. What does need to change though is the way your ambition has been wired to pressure, urgency, and self monitoring. Because ambition, when it's fused with all of these internal pressures, becomes so fucking exhausting. But on the other hand, ambition, when it's held inside a regulated system, when you are fully regulated head to toe, mind, body, spirit, the very same ambition feels expansive. And that is the single most important differentiation that people miss, because no one is actually teaching women how to make that shift. But instead, what as women get told is that we've got to shrink our ambition, or that our ambition and motherhood cannot coexist without us dropping the ball somewhere, which is exactly why I call BS on that whole theory. And that's exactly why I say doing less actually feels like betrayal of ourselves rather than a solution. If somebody came and told me do less without really understanding the ins and outs of my drive and my life and lifestyle, I would say go to hell. Exactly, because that's the last thing that I want to be doing, right? Now, let me slow it down even further, because this is one of the most important distinctions that you're going to want to hear. And that is, you are not tired because your life is full, but you are tired because there is no place inside your system where all of these things get to land without any kind of pressure. And that's exactly why there's no completion. Everything continues to roll into the next. You're going from one thing to another, to another, and to another, to another, and nothing lands anywhere. Exactly why even success to you, the most amount of success and accomplishments and accolades and applause, doesn't feel satisfying for very long. They're all fleeting. You're on to the next thing. You don't even take enough time to celebrate your win, because there is this internal pressure to maintain it that continues to show up. Like right away, you're done with the one thing and you're on to the next, on to the next, on to the next. And would you call that a mindset issue? No, that is far from a mindset issue, but that's a nervous system and identity issue. And until that's addressed, any solution that stays at the level of schedules, boundaries, or productivity will feel like another thing you're constantly failing at. Which is why so many ambitious working moms quietly continue to think, if this is what balance looks like, maybe I'm just not cut out for it. I will never be able to achieve that elusive work life balance that everybody talks about. And that's exactly what breaks my heart so much, because that is far from truth. Like, isn't it already evident from the previous episode and this episode that that's not true at all? You're not failing at balance, but balance is what's failing you. And the moment you stop trying to contort yourself into this advice that was never designed for how you actually operate, is actually the moment that things are going to start shifting for you. With that said, now let's actually look at what's actually underneath all of this. And I'm not going to talk about another tactic or another framework that you have to memorize right now, because this episode is not for that. But first, we have to look at a different way of understanding what your system is actually asking for and why nothing else has worked out for you so far. So now that we have bust the myths about time management and doing less and balance, the next natural question needs to be, what is actually happening? Why does it feel so persistent? Why does it show up even when things are technically fine? And why do so many ambitious working moms reach this point where they think maybe this is just how life feels now? And if you really take a step back and look at this, the answer looks super simple. And I'm going to be very honest and straight with you as I say that. And we started off this episode by saying you're not burned out because you're doing too much, but you're burned out because of this. Now, what is the this here that I'm talking about? This I'm talking about here is you are burned out because your system is constantly bracing, not bracing for any kind of emergency, right? That's where people get it wrong. Not bracing because something is actually actively wrong somewhere, but bracing because somewhere along the way, you actually learn that it's safer to stay ahead than to fully arrive. And that's exactly why you struggle with so many of the things that we spoke about in the previous episode and in this episode, because you always live slightly forward of your own life. And it's not so much ahead, but it's always like you're on to the next thing, thinking about what's next, tracking what could go wrong, carrying the weight of what hasn't happened yet. And over time, that's exactly what creates so much exhaustion that no amount of rest or anything else can fix. Because rest, like we discussed earlier, doesn't tell your system it's safe for you to stand down right now. And that's exactly why so many ambitious working moms say things like, I don't even know what I want anymore, because they're achieving things and they don't feel as much and they're on to the next thing and they feel like, I don't know what I want anymore. Or the fact that I feel disconnected from myself. Or worse yet, I feel like I'm always managing one thing after another, and never really enjoying anything. And why do you think that is? That's not because you've lost yourself. It's because your attention is always slightly ahead of where you are. When you're not present in the present moment, nothing lasts, nothing feels exciting anymore, nothing can bring you the peace and joy that your soul is so deeply craving for. And also, you can't even be present because that presence feels fleeting. Exactly why. Joy feels brief. And don't even get me started on completion, because that feels so rare. And now, please pay even closer attention, because this is even more important. This isn't about trauma in a dramatic sense. This isn't about something being wrong with you, but this is simply about adaptation, because your system adapted beautifully to responsibility, ambition, care, etc., etc., etc. But it just never really learned how to release. And when you don't have a release mechanism, pressure becomes your baseline. Like how many times I talk to my clients right now, even some of my high achieving friends, when I have these conversations, they thrive under pressure. Like, have you had a feeling, forget have you heard, where you're like, oh, I procrastinate and procrastinate and procrastinate all the time because I work so much better under pressure, I get it done. Why do you think that is? Because that's your baseline, because your body doesn't know how to operate if it is not under that pressure, if it is not feeling that attack. But what people miss is that pressure is that fight or flight mode. you are frying your goddamn nervous system all day, every day, and you think that you're successful and you're thriving, where you're merely stuck in that fight or flight mode all day, every damn day. And that is not sustainable, both for you and your internal system. Sooner or later, it's going to give in, and that's going to be a place of no return. And that's the piece most advice skips, because when everything else is still looking great on the inside, it all still feels heavy. And it's so much easier for people to just tell somebody to reorganize your schedule than to help them actually look within internally and have them reorganize their internal relationship with themselves, with ambition, with responsibility, with safety. And that internal relationship is actually everything. Because until that shifts, every solution will be filtered through the same pressure of doing more without truly enjoying any damn thing. That's exactly why you rest, but you feel guilty. You succeed, but you still feel anxious about missing something somewhere. You slow down, but you still feel like you're going to be exposed instead of feeling relief. And then this vicious cycle continues, because then you assume the solutions didn't work for you instead of questioning whether it was ever aimed at the right layer. So I will say this one more time. What actually needs to change is not how much you do, it's how much you are actually holding internally that you don't even realize, because there are layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of shit that we are holding on to. Not from this week, not from this year, not from this decade, even decades worth of stuff. And that's exactly what most women don't see. But on the other hand, when you actually get the right kind of help to dig deeper and look at that, that's where a lot of women feel an emotional release when they finally see it. Because for the first time, the problem actually makes sense. Of course, balance never worked. Of course, time management felt hollow. Of course, doing less felt like another demand instead of freedom. Because those approaches never addressed the internal bracing. They just asked you to perform differently while holding the same amount of internal pressure. And now, do you think that's sustainable? No, that's hella unsustainable. Now, don't jump to conclusions just yet, because this is where people often jump ahead and miss the actual point. Please hear carefully when I say this. The solution is not to drop responsibility, it's not to care less, and it's definitely not to dismantle the life you have built. But the solution is actually learning how to effectively operate inside that life without your nervous system carrying all of this alone and being burdened all day, every day for the rest of your life. Which is exactly why I say that there is a way to live with ambition, motherhood, responsibility that actually doesn't require constant overthinking, self monitoring, and the worst of all, that urgency, that internal urgency. And what all of this actually requires is a different relationship that you create with yourself. One where your worth isn't actually tied to staying ahead, one where rest doesn't need to be earned, and one where present isn't something you squeeze into between obligations. And that shift doesn't happen through information alone, because this is not rocket science. This information is available everywhere. And I'm going to be real with you. That shift is not going to happen through information alone, because, like I said, we are all smart, capable, intelligent women, and information is at the tip of our fingers. Go on to ChatGPT and you have all of your answers for all of your and your neighbors' life problems. But what people miss is that these shifts can only happen through experience, through guidance, and actually being in a container that helps you and your nervous system, your internal system, feel safe enough to let go of that brace. As I say, you cannot solve a problem from the same level of consciousness that created the problem. And that's why most women can't do this on their own, no matter how self aware they are, no matter how many podcasts they listen to, no matter how many self help books they read. I mean, even to this day, I catch myself in some of these patterns, and I have to work through those with my own coaches and mentors, talk through it, and actually see the blind spots that I am still not seeing. And there's a reason these are blind spots. You can't see it through your own eyes, right? Because no matter how self aware you and I are, awareness doesn't automatically rewire how your body relates to any of these elements, and especially how your body relates to pressure. I mean, it lets you see it, of course, but beyond that, nothing really happens. So, if you have been listening to this episode all while thinking that, oh my goodness gracious, like my daughter says, she exaggerates everything that I say. She takes everything that I say and makes it even more dramatic and even more adorable. So, if you've been listening to this episode and thinking, oh my goodness gracious, this explains so much, I invite you to please trust that response. Not because I have said anything clever, but because your system is finally recognizing truth when it actually hears it. On that note, there's only so much I can share in the setting of a podcast episode, because some of this you need to experience live, have a live experience. So I am creating something super specific for ambitious working moms who are ready to stop living in this constant catch up mode and start building a life that actually feels supportive from the inside out. It's not about fixing you, it's not about doing more or less, it's about learning how to hold your life differently. If you're somebody who constantly feels behind, it's not because you are. It's because you've been carrying too much internally for too long without a place to set it down. And trust me when I say nothing has gone wrong, and you don't need to become someone else you already are not. You just need a framework that actually finally matches the reality of how you live on the inside and what you've been carrying for decades. On that note, keep pondering on some of the insights that came up for you as you listen to this episode. Maybe you need to listen to both this episode and the previous episode a few more times, and that's totally okay. But I'm glad that you stayed with me through this conversation, because that is the most important aspect. This is not something you solve alone. Because if this episode felt like it finally put words to something you've been carrying for far too long, I want you to know this conversation doesn't end here. It's just the beginning. And on that note, I will be hosting a live webinar soon where we go much deeper on all of the things that we spoke about on this episode and the previous episode, and share resolutions for each of that. And trust me when I tell you, the webinar is not about more motivation, more inspiration. It's not about doing more, doing less, or fixing yourself. Instead, it's where I walk you through what's exactly happening underneath the pressure and why so many capable women feel like they're constantly behind, and what needs to shift so your life stops feeling like one long state of catch up, especially if you've tried time management, boundaries, balance, and self care, and so on and so forth, and still feel exhausted in your body and busy in your mind. This webinar will finally answer all of those questions for you, along with giving you the resolutions for all of your deep inner pain points. On that note, if this episode resonated, don't ignore that resonance is the deep insight that you, your mind, your body, and your spirit needed in this time. I will see you all soon. Bye for now.
Thank you for joining me on another episode of this podcast. I appreciate your time, your presence, your commitment, and your willingness to embark on this journey of self discovery, transformation, and manifestation. If anything you heard today resonated with you, sparked new insights, or brought about aha moments, I'd love to hear all about them. So please share your thoughts by tagging me on social media at Passion Purpose Passport and follow me there for more inspiring content and connection. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and show your support by liking, reviewing, and sharing this podcast. The more good we share with the world, the more the universe unfolds its magic for us. It's not just good karma, it's the universal law, aka Manifestation 101. On that note, align your mind, body, heart, and soul with your deepest desires for limitless possibilities. Remember, every step you take, every action you choose ripples through the universe, shaping the reality you wish to experience. Until next time, keep basking in the brilliance of your inner golden hour and keep manifesting miracles.